Rain poured on the tin roof as Hybo stood outside her in-laws' mansion, shivering. The suitcase in her hand was almost empty, her dignity even emptier. Her mother-in-law's words still rang like a curse. "You are worthless, Hybo. You bring nothing to this family. Leave our house at once." Her husband, Fumo, stood by silently, arms crossed, not defending her, not even looking her in the eye. She begged, "Please just let me stay until morning." But the door slammed, locking her out of the only life she knew. With nowhere to go, Hybo vanished into the night, carrying nothing but broken pride and a vow whispered to herself. "If they call me worthless, then one day, I'll return with a worth they can never measure." For years later, the engines of a private jet roared above the same city, and the woman they had thrown out was coming back, not as a beggar, but as a storm. That night was the darkest night of Hybo's life. She stood in the middle of the living room, her heart shaking as her mother-in-law's sharp voice cut through her like a knife. "You are worthless, Hybo. You bring nothing to this family." The old woman spat, her eyes filled with anger and disgust. The words felt heavier than stones, pressing down on Hybo's chest. She wanted to explain, to beg for a little mercy, but her tongue felt dry. Beside her, her husband Fumo stood silently with his arms crossed, watching her as if she was a stranger. Hybo's eyes searched his face, hoping he would defend her, hoping he would speak even one word for her. But his lips stayed closed, his eyes cold, and his silence betrayed her more than his words ever could. She whispered, "Fumo, please say something." But he did not even look at her. Her mother-in-law ordered her out, pointing at the door as if she was nothing but dust to be swept away. Hybo's suitcase was already packed with a few clothes. She had been warned before, but this time there was no turning back. Tears filled her eyes as she clutched the handle, her dignity breaking into pieces. She begged softly, "Please, just let me stay until morning." But the door slammed shut behind her, shutting her out of the only home she had ever known. Standing outside in the cold night, her heart ached with betrayal. The rain began to fall, soaking her thin dress, but the pain inside her chest was worse than the storm above. Her in-laws had humiliated her, and her husband had chosen silence over love. She felt abandoned, unwanted, and crushed. Yet in that same moment, something inside her refused to die. As the water dripped from her hair and her hands shook from the cold, she whispered to herself, "If they call me worthless today, one day I will return with a worth they can never measure." It was a quiet vow, born out of heartbreak, but it lit a small fire in her soul. That night of rejection was not just the end of her marriage. It was the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. Hybo walked through the dark streets with her small suitcase dragging behind her. The rain had stopped, but her heart still felt heavy. She had no place to go, no family nearby, and no money in her pocket. The city that once felt big and full of life now looked cold and empty. She tried to hold back her tears, but they kept falling as she wandered from one corner to another, hoping someone would show her a little kindness. That first night, she sat outside a small shop, curling up against the wall to keep warm. She hugged her suitcase like it was the only thing she had left in the world. The ground was hard, her stomach empty, but she whispered to herself the same words she had promised in the rain. "I will not give up. One day, I will return stronger." Those words gave her just enough courage to make it through the night. Days turned into weeks, and Hybo learned what it meant to truly struggle. She knocked on doors asking for work, but most people turned her away. Some gave her leftover bread, others gave her harsh looks. When she could not find work, she walked into shelters where women like her slept on thin mats, side by side, sharing stories of pain and survival. The smell was bad, the room was crowded, but at least it was a roof over her head. In the mornings, she worked wherever she could. She cleaned tables at roadside stalls, washed clothes for strangers, and carried heavy baskets in the market for a few coins. Her hands became rough, her back ached, but she refused to stop. Every night, when she laid her tired body on a shelter bed or even on a piece of cardboard outside, she whispered the same vow. "This is not my end. I will rise." Sometimes hunger made her dizzy, and sometimes shame burned her when she saw old neighbors passing by. She knew they were whispering about her, the woman who had been thrown out of her marriage, the woman with nothing. But instead of breaking her, their whispers became fuel. She told herself that one day, these same people would see her return, and they would not believe what she had become. Haibo's clothes grew older, her shoes wore out, but inside her heart, something new was being built, strength. She was wounded, but she was not destroyed. Her struggles on the streets were shaping her into someone different, someone tougher, someone ready for the destiny waiting ahead. One morning, after another long night at the shelter, Haibo walked to the market hoping to find some small job. She was weak from hunger, her clothes worn out, but her eyes still carried a quiet fire. As she stood near the stalls, watching other women selling fruits and vegetables, she noticed one old stall that looked almost abandoned. The baskets of tomatoes were bruised, the peppers half-rotten, and customers walked past without stopping. Behind the stall sat an elderly man with tired eyes. He looked at Haibo standing nearby, clutching her empty bag, and for a moment their eyes met. The man, whose name was Mzee, had been running that stall for years, but business was dying. He had no family to help, and his health was failing. Still, when he looked at Haibo, he saw something in her face that reminded him of his younger self, determination mixed with pain. He called her closer and asked, "Do you need work?" Haibo's heart raced. No one had asked her that in weeks. She nodded quickly, afraid that if she spoke, her voice would break. Jabari studied her for a while, then said, "This stall is failing. I cannot pay much, maybe only a few coins each day. But if you want to try, you can stand here with me." For Haibo, it felt like a door opening in the middle of darkness. She agreed at once, even though it was almost nothing. To her, it was not just about money. It was a chance to prove herself. The first day she stood at the stall, people barely looked at her. But Haibo did not sit down or complain. She greeted every passerby with a smile, arranging the vegetables neatly, wiping them clean, and calling out politely to customers. She remembered the vow she had made in the rain, and she treated that small stall as if it was already a big shop. Slowly, people began to notice her energy. A woman stopped to buy onions, another man came back the next day for tomatoes, and little by little, the stall that was once ignored began to attract attention again. Jabari watched her closely. He saw how she never gave up, even when sales were small. At night, when they packed up the unsold goods, Haibo thanked him again and again for trusting her. He shook his head and said, "No, child. You are the one giving life back to this place." Those words gave her hope. For the first time since being thrown out, Haibo felt that maybe her future was not lost. This stranger's kindness became the small spark that would soon light the fire of her destiny. Haibo treated the small stall as if it was her own, even though she earned only a few coins each day. Every morning, she arrived before the market opened, cleaning the table, washing the vegetables, and arranging them neatly, in rows. Instead of letting the food look old and tired, she made everything shine. She smiled warmly at customers, greeted them by name when she remembered, and even offered to carry their bags. Slowly, the stall that had once been forgotten began to stand out. People started to say, "That girl is different. She cares about what she is selling." Haibo noticed that many stalls sold the same items, but she wanted theirs to feel special. She began offering little things that cost nothing but meant everything. If someone bought a basket of tomatoes, she added a small pepper for free. If an old woman came with not enough money, Haibo still gave her the onions and said, "Pay next time." That trust made people return again and again. Soon, customers were lining up at their table while other sellers watched with surprise. She also had ideas that no one else thought of. When vegetables were about to spoil, instead of throwing them away, she sliced and dried them, selling them cheaply to women who needed ingredients for soups. She learned how to make small spice mixes from leftover herbs, wrapping them in paper and offering them to buyers. Customers loved it, saying, "This girl is smart. She knows what people need." Word of mouth spread quickly, and the stall's sales began to double. Mzee Jabari was shocked. He had owned the stall for years and never imagined it could grow this way. Every evening as they packed up, he would shake his head in wonder and say, "Haibo, you are not just selling food. You are building something bigger." She would smile, but deep inside, she knew he was right. A tiny flame had been lit in her heart. For the first time, she felt the power of creating her own future. Even though her clothes were still old and her pockets light, her spirit was no longer broken. Each happy customer, each coin earned, planted a seed of confidence inside her. She realized she had more than survival skills, she had vision. The insult that once crushed her now fueled her. And she whispered again to herself at night, I will not stop here. This is only the beginning. The little market stall had given her the spark, but Haibo's dreams were already reaching far beyond the crowded market. That Haibo's life began to change in ways she never imagined. What started as helping at a small vegetable stall slowly became the foundation of something bigger. Every day she worked harder than anyone else in the market. She studied how customers behaved, what they wanted, and what made them return. She kept notes in a little book, writing down prices, profits, and ideas. While others closed their stalls early, Haibo stayed late, planning how to turn a few coins into something greater. Her sacrifices were endless. She ate the simplest meals, often just bread and water, so she could save more money. She wore the same worn-out dress for months, refusing to waste money on herself. When other young women were going to parties, she was in the market, arranging goods or counting coins by candlelight. Every ache in her body reminded her of the night she was thrown out, the night her mother-in-law called her worthless. That memory gave her the strength to endure everything. With the trust she had built, more customers asked her to supply them with goods directly. She saw this as an opportunity. Using her savings, she bought vegetables in bulk from farmers outside the city, selling them not just at the stall but also to small restaurants and shops. Her little operation grew fast. Soon, she was no longer just a stall worker. She was becoming a supplier. As demand increased, Haibo hired 2 young women from the shelter she once lived in to help her. She taught them how to treat customers with kindness and honesty, the same way she had learned. Together they managed bigger orders and their name spread. People began saying, if you want fresh goods, go to Haibo. What once was only a stall now felt like a growing business. But Haibo did not stop there. She dreamed. Beyond the market, she used her profits to rent a small storage space, then bought a delivery cart. Soon, her work was no longer just about vegetables. She began trading spices, grains, and other goods that customers demanded. Her tiny stall had transformed into a small startup company. Even as her business grew, Haibo never forgot the insult that had pushed her onto this path. Every deal she made, every coin she earned, reminded her of the words, "You are worthless." She turned those words into fuel. She told herself each day, "I was once thrown away, but I will build something so strong they will never ignore me again." From a market stall to a trading company, Haibo's rise had only begun, and her determination burned brighter with every sacrifice she made. That Haibo's small trading company grew faster than anyone expected. What started with vegetables and grains soon expanded into something much larger. She had a gift for seeing opportunities where others only saw problems. When farmers complained about not having buyers for their harvest, Haibo made deals to purchase directly from them at fair prices. When restaurants needed steady supplies, she created delivery schedules and never failed them. Her reliability and honesty built her reputation, and people began to trust her name more than big shops in the city. With her savings, she bought trucks to carry goods across towns. What once was just a small storehouse became a busy hub filled with workers packing, loading, and unloading. Haibo trained her team herself, teaching them the same values she lived by: respect, honesty, and hard work. Soon, her business reached not only her city but also nearby towns. Farmers from different villages waited for her, knowing that if Haibo bought their goods, they would never be cheated. Her sharp mind did not stop there. She noticed that spices from one region were rare in another, so she began moving goods across borders. She traded rice, beans, spices, and fresh produce, building connections with suppliers in different countries. At first, people doubted her because she was young and a woman, but her persistence broke every barrier. She handled every deal with confidence, making sure no one could take advantage of her. Investors soon heard about this rising businesswoman whose name was spreading in trade circles. They were surprised to learn that she had built everything from nothing. Some approached her, offering to invest in her company. At first, she was cautious, remembering how betrayal once ruined her life, but after careful thought, she accepted partnerships that would help her expand further. With new funding, Haibo opened warehouses in other cities, hired managers, and set up systems that allowed her business to run smoothly even without her presence at every site. She became a silent powerhouse, rarely showing off her success, but always moving like a storm behind the scenes. While others sought fame, Haibo focused on results. She was still the same woman who once slept on shelter floors, but now she owned fleets of trucks, contracts with big companies, and influence that reached beyond her borders. Her empire was not just about money. It was proof of her resilience, proof that the girl once called worthless was now more powerful than those who had cast her aside. Hybo had built more than a business. She had built a legacy, and her journey was only getting started. 4 years had passed since the night Hybo was thrown out into the rain with nothing but a small suitcase and broken pride. In those years, she had turned her pain into power and her struggle into success. The girl who once begged for shelter was no longer walking the streets. She now owned businesses across borders, and her name was quietly rising in the world of trade. Newspapers wrote about a mysterious young woman who had built an empire from nothing, but no one in her hometown connected those stories to the Hybo they had once rejected. On a bright morning, the sound of a private jet roared above the city, drawing the attention of many. People looked up, curious about who such an important guest could be. That jet belonged to Hybo. She sat inside, calm but thoughtful, looking out the window as the city of her past came into view. This was the same place where she had been humiliated, yet now she was returning not as the broken wife who had been cast out, but as a woman of influence and wealth. Her arrival made headlines. Journalists whispered about the businesswoman who had arrived on her own jet, the one whose company was supplying goods across nations. People gossiped in markets and cafes saying, "She is young, she is powerful, and no one even knows her real story." Everyone wanted to meet her, but Hybo moved quietly, choosing to remain low profile. Meanwhile, her in-laws continued their lives without knowing the storm that had landed in their city. Her mother-in-law still carried herself with pride, speaking badly of Hybo whenever her name came up, saying she was a weak girl who could never survive on her own. Fumo, her husband, had grown more distant from his family responsibilities, and though he sometimes wondered where Hybo had gone, he never expected her to have built anything meaningful. To them, she was still the same woman they had thrown away. But whispers began to spread faster. In business circles, the name Hybo was mentioned with respect. Investors praised her wisdom, partners spoke about her honesty, and employees admired her strength. Yet none of her in-laws connected that name to the woman they had once insulted. As her jet rested on the runway, Hybo stepped down dressed with quiet elegance. She carried no anger on her face, only calm determination. The city had no idea what was about to happen. The woman they had called worthless had returned home, and soon her true identity would shake them to the core. The city was buzzing with excitement as Fumo's family prepared for a grand wedding. The mansion was decorated with lights, flowers, and music. Guests filled the hall, dressed in their finest clothes, ready to celebrate. For the in-laws, it was another chance to show off their wealth and status. They walked proudly among the guests, greeting everyone, never imagining that the woman they once threw out would appear that very night. As the ceremony began, the hall was filled with laughter and chatter. But then, the doors at the back slowly opened, and a sudden hush fell over the room. Every head turned, and eyes widened. A woman stepped inside, tall and graceful, dressed in an elegant gown that shimmered under the lights. Her jewelry was simple yet powerful, the kind only someone of true success would wear. She carried herself with calm confidence, every step echoing through the silent hall. It was Hybo. For a moment, no one recognized her. She looked so different from the girl they had once humiliated, the girl they had thrown into the rain with nothing. But when her eyes met Fumo's, his face turned pale. His mouth opened in shock, yet no words came out. The mother-in-law, who had once called her worthless, froze where she stood, her glass slipping from her hand. The relatives who used to laugh at her downfall now sat in silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. Hybo did not rush or shout. She walked slowly through the hall, every guest watching her as if a queen had entered the room. The whispers began to spread. Who is she? She came in a private jet. Isn't that the famous businesswoman everyone talks about? The whispers grew louder until someone finally said her name out loud. It's Hybo. Gasps filled the air. The family members shifted nervously, their pride shrinking with every step she took. The same woman they had mocked for having nothing now stood before them with power and grace. She was not a broken beggar anymore. She was a woman whose success shone brighter than the lights of the wedding hall. Hybo stopped at the center of the room. She didn't need to explain herself yet. Her presence alone was enough to silence all their arrogance. The bride and groom looked at her in confusion, the guests stared in awe, and her in-laws lowered their eyes in shame. The confrontation had begun without a single word spoken. By simply walking into that hall, Hybo had turned their grand celebration into a stage for her return, and the family that once rejected her was now drowning in the weight of her unexpected presence. All eyes stayed on Hybo as she stood in the middle of the wedding hall. The silence was heavy, broken only by whispers spreading from table to table. People wanted to know who she truly was. Some had guessed already, but most could not believe that the woman glowing with elegance was the same Hybo they had once heard about. Finally, she lifted her chin and spoke, her voice steady but strong enough for every ear in the hall to hear. "You all know me," she began, pausing as her eyes swept across the room. 4 years ago, I stood in this same family's home, humiliated, rejected, and thrown into the rain like I was nothing. I begged for shelter, but instead I was called worthless. Her words pierced the air like sharp arrows. Gasps echoed as guests turned toward Fumo and his mother. Their faces burned with shame, but Hybo did not stop. "I left that night with nothing," she continued. "No money, no family, no home. Only pain in my heart and a vow on my lips. That one day, I would return, not as a beggar, but as someone with worth that could never be denied." She paused again, her eyes locking on her mother-in-law. The older woman's hands trembled, her pride collapsing in front of everyone. Then Hybo revealed the truth that left the hall stunned. "Today, I do not stand here as the abandoned wife you once mocked. I stand here as the founder and owner of one of the largest trading companies in this nation. My empire stretches across borders. Farmers, restaurants, and businesses rely on me. Investors respect me. Newspapers write about me. And yes, I arrived here tonight on my own jet." Murmurs filled the hall as jaws dropped. Some guests clapped their hands over their mouths in shock, while others whispered her name in disbelief. Her voice grew even calmer as she added, "The very family that once called me worthless now sits in the shadow of my success. You threw me away, but you could not bury me. Instead, you planted me, and I grew into something greater than you ever imagined." Fumo's face was pale, his eyes wide with regret. He had chosen silence when she needed him most, and now that silence cost him everything. The mother-in-law lowered her head, unable to meet Hybo's gaze. Relatives who once laughed at her downfall now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The guests could not hide their awe. To them, Hybo was no longer just a woman who survived humiliation. She was living proof of resilience and strength, someone who turned pain into power. By revealing the truth of her identity, she had not only exposed her in-laws' cruelty, but also shown the entire hall that the girl they once mocked had returned more powerful than all of them combined. The hall was still buzzing from her revelation when Hybo raised her hand, signaling for silence. Slowly, the whispers died down, and every eye turned back to her. She stood tall, her face calm yet unshakable, as if the weight of the years had only made her stronger. With steady authority, she spoke her final words. "You left me with nothing," she said, her voice ringing through the hall, clear and unbroken. "But I made everything. My worth was never yours to give, it was mine to build." The hall erupted instantly. Some guests leapt to their feet, clapping and cheering, while others gasped at the boldness of her words. Phones were raised, capturing the moment, knowing it was history in the making. Her in-laws, once so proud and arrogant, now sat frozen in humiliation, their faces pale and their pride shattered in front of the very people they had tried to impress. Fumo lowered his eyes, unable to look at the woman he had betrayed, while his mother gripped her chair, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. But Hybo did not linger on their shame. With dignity, she turned and walked out of the hall, her head held high, her step steady, her presence commanding respect with every move. She did not need to prove anything more. Her life, her success, and her strength had already spoken louder than any insult ever thrown at her. That night, she left not as the broken girl they once mocked, but as a living symbol of resilience. To everyone watching, she became a reminder that no rejection, no betrayal, and no cruelty could stop a determined heart from rising. And as she disappeared into the night, the image of her strength remained, etched forever in the minds of those who witnessed her triumph.